At this time, I'd like to turn the session over to our presenter. We have Prashant Shenoy. Prashant, you may begin.
Thank you, Anna, and hello, everyone. Hope you and your family are staying safe and healthy during these interesting and challenging times, as well as gearing up for the fun holiday season. I definitely am. So over the next 45 minutes, what Chris and I are going to do is quickly go over some of the big trends in the world of networking that we are seeing as it pertains to business resiliency, and have a very active conversation in terms of how Cisco IT is preparing and has prepared, and what does the future look like. And then really have some open Q&A towards the end of the session so we can have an active conversation with you folks. So I'm looking forward to the session here. And before I deep dive, I wanted to introduce my friend and colleague here, Chris Gross. So he's the Director of Technical SE, Systems Engineering at Cisco IT. We call him like the guy to blame if things doesn't work in Cisco. And it's always the network, right? Yeah, we all know that. So hey, Chris, welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started here. So I think I don't know if you folks, I've attended quite a few webinars because that's what we do when we are shutting at home and we can't attend physical events, right? So, and I can't imagine the number of webinars that started with saying that, hey, we live in interesting times, the pandemic, right? So I'm not going to bore you with all the details. We know the life that we're living in right now, but I wanted to take a view from a business, a technology, and a culture perspective, and what recent events have meant from that angle, right? One of the key things that we are seeing, and it shouldn't be any surprise, at least right now, but it would have been a surprise if we told you back in January that a majority of the CFOs, the Chief Financial Officers of major organizations, are making remote work a permanent option for relevant roles, whether it's in engineering or HR or finance, right? That would have never had a conversation back in January of this year, but that's a major shift that we're seeing just from a mindset and a business shift, right? So, and more of the CFOs are now evaluating budget and product decisions based on how resilient, how reliable, and how agile the organizations can be to prepare for the unknown and prepare for the future, right? So it's a big focus with the CFOs, with the CIOs, with the CISOs, and definitely with the CEOs. So those are some of the big shifts that we are seeing. And they're seeing some silver linings where it's helping the finance organization, the IT organization, the businesses to build resilient systems, tools, and processes so that they can position themselves for the long term. So there are some silver linings in terms of how organizations are getting prepared. On a technology perspective, it's no surprise that the threat surface of every organization has increased. One, I think the acceleration from working from home has created distributed workforce and mobile workers. That's one. And more organizations are now tending towards SaaS applications and multi-cloud applications, right? So, and that has drastically increased the threat surface of every organization. So you see the cyber attacks has grown tremendously because of work from home, because a lot of the devices that we use at home are not as enterprise-grade secure as we see in corporate campus and branch offices. So that's one of the key things that we've seen from a technology perspective: growth of cloud services, growth of cybersecurity, and attacks there. And from a culture perspective, I think it's been tough on a lot of us, especially those of us who have families to take care of and kids, etc., on how do you manage and have that balance of work and life. So it's been pretty challenging, and a lot of companies have now focused on the health and well-being, the mental and physical well-being of employees, even more so than ever before. And they're taking a lot more safety measures when we transition back to the workplace. So those are some of the shifts that we are seeing in the marketplace. So when we did this survey a few months back with Tech Validate, talking to global IT professionals, and we asked them what were the disruptions that you were preparing from a network perspective to address. before COVID started. No surprises that pandemic wasn't even in the top 3 or top 5, right? So only 9%, and they are really, they should have some crystal balls, frankly, if they decided that pandemic is going to be a key focus area, right? So it shows the unknowns and how prepared IT organizations need to be, and network organizations, networking IT needs to be, right? So they were always prepared for, like, what if critical infrastructure fails? What if our ISP has an outage, cybersecurity and breach? I think those are normal, and those are extended right now in the current world. But now the unknowns like the pandemic and other things are also getting to be a top disruption. So Chris, from a Cisco IT perspective, was this similar, or were you folks different in terms of preparing for the unexpected?
No, this exactly tracks to Cisco IT. And in fact, if we ever had a conversation around something like a pandemic, we never had a conversation around a global pandemic that would put every office globally, in a different situation. Those conversations would always end with a statement of something like, well, if that happens, we have bigger problems. Guess what? We all have bigger problems, right? And so, if you look at the rest of this chart, many of these things are regional or localized, right? And if you ask any of them from a global perspective, what happens with telecom fails around the world? That's a different story than a SARS outbreak in one country. So we were not really thinking seriously about how to plan for this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But and that's where I think you've had some mindset shift in IT, right? Of like preparing for like outages, et cetera, and having that business continuity conversation to now, like, how do you plan for the unexpected, and how do you make IT organizations and our overall Cisco resilient, and that business resilience conversation. So can you talk a bit on how that mindset shift has occurred?
Yeah, when you're having those conversations about the regional outages or the infrastructure outages or things like that, you think about things like, what if I lose access to this building? It catches on fire and I can't put my call center there, or I lose access to this data center. Where's my backup? They're very infrastructure kind of options for business continuity. And a lot of times from a person perspective, you say things like, oh, well, they'll just work from home. And what, in a situation like this, what you have to sort of pivot to is that just work from home is not just business continuity. It is now the status quo. And so you need to achieve some resiliency out of that, because now you're not protected from a regional internet outage if maybe all your contact center agents are working at home. So you really have to think about at the business level and work with your stakeholders to make sure that they can still deliver the service they want to deliver with this new complete model under the covers, and not just is the infrastructure resilient. How many nines do we have on the infrastructure? That's maybe not as important as, does the call go somewhere and does someone answer it? Or is that workload somewhere that can process the order or the shipping or vice versa, right? So you absolutely have to think about the business aspect and not just the infrastructure and the continuity of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Chris, like knowing that we're all in the pandemic and now the vaccine is on the horizon. In a way, I think the continuity is like having your medicines to get better, and things have happened, right? Like, and how do you fix those things from happening? Whereas the resiliency is like having your immune system take care of itself, right? So you build that immune system within your IT processes, tools, network infrastructure, so that you're always prepared even if things happen, right? So it's like a very different mindset shift from like treating symptoms and medicine to building an immune system in your IT organization. So it requires some major changes there. So that's a pretty interesting way. So I think we've had the same kind of questions asked for our customers in terms of what are the top networking capabilities that you see helping your organization address disruption today, right? And I think some of these should be very straightforward, like secure remote access, because of just the conversation that we've had, because of the remote workspace and workers, is absolutely going to be number one. And it's going to be today and also in the very near future, right? So in the hybrid work model, how do we get IT to do things faster at the pace of application development and deployment? Because pretty much all organizations, the customer interaction and the employee interaction is now digital, and apps are the way to run businesses. So how can network operations get run at the pace of business and application development is going to be one of the key areas from a network capability, right? Like remote NOCs, remote operations, and then how do you get network visibility and insight? Because now a lot of things are not under your control. It's not just corporate network. Internet is the new corporate network, as we say. So how do you get complete visibility from users to application in a distributed user and distributed application environment? Is another key area of focus for a lot of our IT brothers and sisters here. And then to reduce the threat surface, network segmentation, right? And doing micro segmentation. So Chris, from Cisco IT perspective, are these some of the key capabilities that you have already evaluated and deploying and some that you want to scale in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think many of us went on the same curve, right? The very first thing when most of us started working from home is we had to get that basic capability out at scale, that basic secure remote access at scale. And then we had to start enabling some business processes. And the only way to do that fast is with automation. And so as these things sort of go and build on each other, you kind of build this framework for them. And so we're going to continue to invest in some of these because I think we do need to generally be more agile and work faster. And I think you'll see throughout the rest of the slides, you'll see some of these things repeat: automation, analytics, right? Security and policy, right? These things are going to continue to repeat. But yeah, if you don't have the first one, the rest of them probably aren't as important. So you do have to start somewhere. And that's effectively what we had to do, and I suspect everybody else did as well.
That's awesome. So I think let's get to the meat of the conversation here, because I think this is where we want to spend a lot of time in terms of what are some of the 5 big trends that we saw, and we wanted to kind of think through it from a typical day in the life of IT and the big areas of focus for any IT organization, right? It's the workforce, it's the workplace, it's the workload, and it's the operations across those, right? So we wanted to kind of go into each one of these in details and see what are some of the trends happening there, how do we get prepared, and frankly, the meat is frankly Chris and the Cisco IT, and what are some of the best practices you folks have done to help you prepare around these. So without any further ado, just let's go into the workforce side, right, and the first trend here. So Chris, this we got from our umbrella in terms of what happened in March, right? And particularly if you look at this, this is the global umbrella traffic, but a majority of this was Americas, and I think we all know, or we still try to remember, that March was when the shutdown and the lockdown happened, right? So can you talk through some of the trends that you saw during that time to what we are seeing now in terms of the remote workers and the traffic?
That's right. And we have, inside of Cisco IT, we probably have 12 different dashboards that looked a lot like this with almost the exact same curve on them, right? Whether it's the use of WebEx Teams and Teams calls as opposed to direct voice calls, or it's the people that are logging onto their VPN for the first time. We can look back at this point in time and see all these trends spiking up. At the same time, we see badger and rate at our buildings going down, right? And so, we kind of were in the early stages in February. What we really tried to do is start to get a little bit of analytics, because we weren't sure if someone was going to pull the trigger and we were going to all work from home. But we started to sense that it might happen. So we absolutely started to look at this because we knew we needed to address that. And then that quickly allowed us to take a look at the scale of where we needed to adjust the environment to enable that workforce, right? Did we have enough if everyone went home? And probably in early February, that's not what we were thinking. Late February, early March, we were absolutely thinking, oh my God, everybody might go home. What do we do? Do we have enough scale for that? And we have probably, like I said, a dozen of these graphs that show the exact same curve and spike on every metric that's important, that's worthwhile. And that workforce flexibility and speed, that's just what you have to enable. And I think if you didn't enable that, you probably lost some revenue, market share, who knows what, right? But you lost a little ground there.
Yeah. But it's interesting, like as we were talking to your peers, Chris, I was just having a conversation with Fannie Mae and the IT there, right? Like literally overnight, they transferred 99% of their workers to be remote, right? Like literally overnight. The same with like healthcare and hospitals, where they still had essential workers there, like hospital and staff, but all of the support staff were working from home in literally 2 days. So you can see that when the push comes to shove and the IT is prepared, they've been planning, even though they didn't plan, a lot of these folks got to have their infrastructure and the tools and process ready to do that, and then they learned along the way, the more visibility and insights they got through the tools and dashboards that you were just mentioning. So that's pretty interesting. So with that, I would love for this audience to see how are you thinking of enabling your remote workforce? And as you have been doing that and you're planning on scaling that, what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing? So we have an audience poll that should appear on your screen right now. So I would encourage you to take a few seconds here to answer, and you can choose up to 3. And we'll go into more detail in terms of what your answers were. So I'm pretty curious to see.
We should play the Jeopardy music.
Yeah, I know. So, but I think as the audience is answering that, we did a similar survey, and I don't want you folks to be influenced by this, but this is just for conversation, right? Like, again, I think when we say secure remote access, one of the key capabilities, security was a key part of that technology focus area, right? Like everything from VPN access to policy to threat visibility as and when you go remote work, I think is one of the biggest challenges that most of the IT organizations are facing today. And two, how do we address and provide a very productive workspace, just like you have been able to provide in your campus and branch environments, now in your employees' home environments? And how do you understand the end user behavior to do that and provide the application performance? So we've got the polling here, and the interesting thing is you folks are pretty much the same. 64% say security is pretty much the biggest challenge, and application experience and performance is the second, and then IT operations is the third. So it's kind of similar. I think the end user behavior is further down, I think, but you see security definitely, application performance, and IT operations. So I think this is where we are seeing a lot of our customers move towards too. And you can see that from the survey here that more than 1/3 of the gap from a networking perspective was scaling VPN capacity. And I think, Chris, you just talked about that at Cisco IT too. Would you care to comment further in terms of how did you prepare for that before we go into some of the solutions that Cisco has provided in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone always has a DR plan that says stuff like, oh, if things get bad, we'll go into the lab and take these machines and put them here and we'll do this. Yeah, we had to do that, right? We went into every lab we had. We reached out to our CX peers, and every sort of spare firewall we had, if we thought we needed extra capacity in that region, we started to turn them on. Everyone on the team that could spell VPN was probably working on VPN for about a 2 to 3 week period, right, to make sure everything was ready and rock solid and all the devices were in and all the monitoring was set up. So scaling is absolutely one of the number one things we had to do. We also, I just want to highlight, it was low in the poll a second ago. We paid a lot of attention to the end user experience, not just the application performance on that. We did have to do some performance tuning, but we always had a work from home capability, but not everyone used it every day. And we were positive as soon as someone said everyone should work from home, we would have flooded the help desk with requests on password resets and how do I turn it on, and it's not working the way I expected it to. So we actually spent quite a bit of time on that, working with our frontline help desk peers to make sure that those were as seamless as they could possibly be. We knew they'd be rocky, but we wanted them to be as less rocky as we could make them, because we knew we had to get these people working from home and get them working from home successfully. So that was important to us. So we did spend quite a bit of time on that.
Yeah. And I think now you're seeing, and we had a big advisory board with some of our top service providers and enterprise customers recently. And it was interesting to say the service providers, how they had to scale their capacity overnight. And they were able to achieve that, the big service providers of the world, including those in the Americas. And they were able to increase the broadband capacity because people were now binge watching Netflix and YouTube also, but at the same time, they were having all these WebEx and video collaborations too. So you could see a huge spike in video overnight, but at the same time, they had the broadband capacity to provide that experience. So I think it shows the resiliency that a lot of systems have been built in place, right? So when we think about the foundational and advanced capabilities required to provide that safe and consistent work experience from anywhere while having consistent policy and security architecture, I think the key ways in which Cisco has addressed that is one, there's no one size fits all, right? So you need to have flexible access type, right? So some having direct broadband access, some having VPN connectivity, and then from there tromboning and accessing your cloud access, some having direct internet access for the SaaS application. So it's very important to provide that secure remote teleworker solution with the capability to provide flexibility in deployment models, right? And that's one of the key things. The second thing is to have this kind of a zero trust environment becomes very, very crucial, right? So how do we do multi-factor authentication, which is going to be very key with things like Cisco Duo that we have and any connect capability that we have, as well as the micro-segmentation capability that we provide in Cisco software-defined access solution, extending into the campus environment. How do you do that? And then providing a teleworker kit in a box, like what we have with our Meraki telecommuter solution, and the Cisco ISR and wireless access point solution is another key area of capabilities that we provide. And now we feel, and Chris, we would like to get your opinion too, as we scale this to a multi-cloud environment and SaaS environment, you need to have cloud security capabilities, right? So for things like DNS layer security, SIG capabilities, URL and web filtering capabilities, those become very, very crucial and to be done at scale for hundreds and thousands of workers. So you can't set your security infrastructure all in every single person's home. So you need to have a cloud-based security. So things like Cisco Umbrella becomes very key. So how is Cisco IT thinking through each one of these, Chris, and what have we done and implemented so far?
Yeah, so we'll start from the first set, and then we'll go to the cloud set. So from the first set, you talked about the at-home offerings, and it's actually funny. A peer of mine is answering Q&A right now, John Heaton. His team is a team that partners very closely with my team, and they evaluate a myriad of different offerings. They basically look at almost every Cisco solution that's out there, and then we partner on which ones we're going to roll out at scale. And so, yes, we have a fixed router at home that has some wired ports for people who are hardware engineers that may need to connect a personal lab at home with a lab on site. We also have some wireless options at home for people who just want to get the corporate wireless network in their house. Maybe it's more convenient to them than using the VPN. And then we have VPN and zero trust options where you can either VPN into the corporate network or use zero trust on the applications. More and more of them we're putting out in the DMZ or putting out in the public cloud. All those require, a certain amount of device posture. So we use the AnyConnect client to do that, and I think we're using Meraki Device Manager on all the devices now, all your laptops. And so we, try to embrace that defense in depth to handle that. And then at the flip side, we're also looking at the cloud-based offerings, because one of the things we know is while we may have put in, a bunch of firewalls that are physical devices today, at some point in time, we'll probably get to a point where we need to refresh those, and we're not going to refresh them with hardware. We're going to refresh them with VMs in the cloud. So we're already thinking about how we set that up and how we work it. We've got some pilots working with the Secure Internet Gateway as a VPN front end, so a VPN in the cloud, right? And we're looking at SASE offers, right? So those are the kind of things that when this happens, I think the one lesson for us is this has happened. It will happen again. And next time, instead of scrambling for physical boxes, we want to be a little bit more nimble ourselves and leverage the cloud and make sure we can deliver all those capabilities to the right ones that make the most sense for the people in their homes, but with the right level of security, scale, and speed. And I think the cloud will help us with that. It'll be a lot less painful than trying to find boxes and manually wire them into places to meet the demand.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And from a Cisco perspective, we'll show you some links at the very end of the presentation, but we made it easy for you to buy and consume this offering because your workers and your employees are all different, right? There are some essential workers, there's knowledge workers, there's executives, and the bandwidth requirement, the application requirement, security requirement are all kind of different. So we made it packaged very simply to create a bill of materials for you to purchase our secure remote worker offering there. So let's go to the second trend in terms of the workplace here, right? So we clearly envision the work of tomorrow will be hybrid work. Again, going back to the customer advisory board that we just had recently with our top customers across the globe, Americas and Europe and APJC, it's clear that they are going to envision a hybrid work environment where they expect around maybe 30% to be working from home for the long-term future, 40 to 50% pretty much working in the campus, and 20 to 30% being this flex where a couple of days they're working from home and the rest they are working from office, right? So that's kind of the hybrid world that we expect to have. So it means that, you need to rethink your campus designs and campus environments in terms of when you are getting back to work, how will your traffic patterns change? What kind of applications will you see more utilized for your workforce, and how do you prepare for that? And this is a pretty interesting chart to see how the wireless trend shifted and changed. And we got this from the telemetry of our DNA Center dashboard, right? The DNA Center, which is our management platform to manage wired and wireless access environments for campus and large branch offices. And it was interesting to see the dip, obviously, in China during the early February timeframe, but then you see that happening in the U.S. in the March to April timeframe when we went into complete shutdown, right? The wireless access dropped tremendously. But now you're seeing some of the things, for example, Sweden, if you see that in March, the rate of wireless was around 25 to 30%, and now it's going to 40% when they come back to work. It shows that the traffic patterns are changing, but also the need for wireless in campus environment is increasing because everybody wants to do video from the desktop, as an example. So that requires high bandwidth, that requires reliable coverage of wireless in your campus environment. So we will have to rethink in terms of designing the wireless strategy when you return to work. So Chris, back to you in terms of how are you kind of thinking about the wireless trend, and as people safely return to work, how does that impact?
Yeah, I don't think we even fully understand the impact of some of these, I say cultural, but I don't mean that in a nationality or a regional perspective. I mean how people use the workplace, right? A year ago, we would have had conversations like, how many ports do we need to put into an office we're renovating, and do people really plug in? And I think that's fundamentally changed, because not only has this brought about a work from home kind of aspect of the replying to the pandemic, but when we go back, we will work more flexibly. And so even if we are a flex person who's in some time and in some of the rest of the time, we may not plug in. We probably don't plug in at home. So it's fundamentally changing how we're using things. And I think what you'll see is a shift in how we build our workspaces. More wireless, probably more collaboration video units in the conference rooms, right? Maybe we'll rethink, wired headsets, and we'll all be doing Bluetooth because no one wants to leave their headset on their desk because they're afraid someone's going to use it and touch it, right? Those are the sort of business cultural shifts that, we'll probably see for the next couple of years as a reaction to this.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because we see this open workplaces happening, and now we are seeing hot desking kind of a thing, because you're not going to have a given space for a lot of employees. So you need that wireless capability to be always on, right? You're not going to plug in, as you're mentioning. But also we see a lot of our customers investing in things like smart buildings, right? So you need to have more and more energy efficient buildings. So how do you get energy utilization, energy monitoring using your network infrastructure like your campus switching that you have, and use it to better monitor and reduce the energy and carbon emissions? It's a huge area of priorities, both in America and especially in Europe, which are building environmentally sustainable buildings there, right? So again, would love your feedback here and see how are you preparing the network in your campus and branch environments as you're planning for that safe return to campus and safe return to your offices, right? So, and again, just like the last polling, you can choose up to 3. So the polling is open round.
I'm just reading through these polls here. These are interesting.
Yeah.
A question that I'm sort of curious that everybody, to ask everybody. We don't, we can't do that here because we can't build in the poll. But I wonder how many people, what percentage of various enterprises, when they shut down and send everybody home, what percentage of staff they maintained in those buildings because they had to? Data center staff, labs, right? That would be an interesting data point to have maybe for one of the future conversations around this.
Yeah.
Because some buildings and places never shut, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think for engineering kind of environments, you'll always see, right, the labs need to be up and running. So the hardware facilities need to be up and running. The supply chain facilities, right? So
supply chain, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we got the polling. It's pretty evenly split, interestingly. So a lot of it is around remote NetOps and help desk. That's coming up at number one at 25%. And the second one is more critical asset tracking to improve operational efficiency is what is coming as the second one from our this thing. And then proximity reporting and social distancing is coming number three from our audience here. So it's interesting to see. I think they are in the top five, as you mentioned. But I'm curious, Chris, as you are looking at network operations, how much of a need for remote NetOps are you seeing in Cisco IT? Because we're going to talk about other things like proximity reporting and capabilities like asset tracking that you're building in our buildings in San Jose and other places. But just from a NOC perspective, how are you thinking through?
Yeah, and we have those buildings where there's always somebody there, the labs and the data centers. Those we can still call someone and say, hey, something's going on. Can you go look at that and put your eyes on it? But most of the other buildings, field sales offices, branch sites, there's no one there, and there's no one that can get there without it being difficult or without us having to ask a liability or a health question. So we've been relying quite a bit. We've actually accelerated our deployment of DNA Center. I think we're at 70-80% of our branches and sites have their switches and routers on DNA Center right now, so we can do a little bit more remote telemetry. And that's how we're really able to check on it, because we can't actually get people into a lot of these locations. And if we do, it's one of those questions that becomes a health and safety question. Do you send someone to a branch to check something out, or can you do some remote steps first, right, to maybe go a little bit deeper remotely so you don't have to send someone out to check cables or send someone out to check a device? Because there are health concerns, right? Health and safety. So we do try to pay attention to that. We also, I think this is a great one because we also have DNA Spaces that we've been deploying. And again, a shout out to my friend John, who's managing the Q&A, who's been really spearheading a lot of that. As part of the return to office, some of the sites we never stop monitoring, and we use those remote NOC capabilities of DNA Center or vManage if it's an SD-WAN site to see what's going on there. So when we start to talk return to office, we've got a dashboard. We can look at a building and see if the lights are all green and if everything looks good and there's no alerts or alarms. But then we've also been deploying DNA Spaces. And so especially in Asia Pac, where we had some of our first offices reopen, we made sure to get DNA Spaces there, and our workplace resources team, sort of the real estate team that manages the physical facilities, they're also using that to check things like density, badge in rates in and out, stay, how long people are staying in a location. And they use that for targeted cleaning. I don't think they're using it for contact tracing in some countries because of some legal requirements. But, those sorts of density, space management, where to focus the cleaning, where to focus their activities on, which parts of the building to open up, even what parts of the building people are using so maybe they can adjust power. Those are really key to getting ready for the return to office. So as our return to office program, we're leveraging a lot of DNA Center and DNA Spaces.
That's awesome. Yeah. So office space utilization and density monitoring, asset tracking and asset management. And I think these depends on the verticals too, right? Like healthcare is very critical to understand where their assets are, from insulin pumps to wheelchairs to temperature control environments, all of that stuff. So I think you see a lot of now usage of solutions like DNA Spaces that provides location analytics, leveraging the existing network infrastructure. So that's been very key. So let's move to the third trend in terms of workloads, right? And we were talking about shifting traffic patterns from an access and connectivity perspective. Now, if you look at it from a different application trend, it is interesting to see between this core peak pandemic time, the file transfers grew 130%, and the enterprise real-time video traffic increased by 50%. I think the latter is not surprised at all, as we've just discussed right now. But the file transfers clearly showcase that, and we also saw an increase in video usage within which there are consumer and recreational video, like the Netflix and the YouTubes of the world that we saw an initial spike, but then it petered down because I think people actually started working a lot more or not connecting to the VPN.
We ran out of things to watch too, right?
Yeah.
We all just ran out of things to watch. We've watched them all.
That's true, but it shows like how quickly IT has to adapt to changing application patterns, and how does things like app QoE and application prioritization becomes very crucial in this environment, right? So from your perspective, Chris, how are you thinking around application prioritization and the workload traffic pattern shifts?
Yeah, in the old model, when you're mostly working from a building and maybe some people, sales guys might be remote, or maybe some remote engineers, it's a different problem to solve, because it doesn't really matter if 5% of your workforce is sending all their traffic over the VPN and it's sort of going in and out of your network, right? When everyone's working from home, it's a different story when you're sending 100,000 people in and out of your network to go, hopefully not all go to Netflix, but to go to something else that's a cloud provided service, right? And so you really do have to watch those workloads. And I think there's a couple things to that. One is from the access layer of the network side, we had to pay attention to where those traffic patterns were. We had to make sure our circuits were burstable. We had to make sure we were getting good application performance data with things like Thousand Eyes. And we had to make sure that, we could steer traffic, maybe split tunneling or maybe some QoS patterns to make sure that we could get good quality of that traffic. But we also had to work closely with our application providers, because it's not just the network side that's saying, oh gosh, we got to get people working. Sure enough, the people inside of our own organizations that do things like machine backups, this is a great time to move all that to the cloud, or let's move these other workloads to the cloud. And we have to be able to respond to that. And if we can't respond to that, not just getting the initial access, but if you can't respond to that, you'll end up hurting other parts of the network. So you really have to work closely with your app teams too, because they are absolutely moving workloads to the cloud. Yeah. And I see you've got the monitoring one up here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other things that we're doing for that. We absolutely, we're using SD-WAN to steer traffic. We're using Thousand Eyes to monitor that traffic, because the problem you have today is not, and I'm wearing the shirt that says blame the network, right? The problem you have today is not a guy in a sales office that says the wireless is down and what they really mean is I can't get to Salesforce. Now it's somebody working from home who can't get to Salesforce, and you don't know if it's your infrastructure, if it's the internet, if it's the actual application and whatever cloud provider that is. So we really do have to look at different ways to cut and dice that information to try to come back with a different view of what's going on so we can support our clients.
Yeah, so I think that's great, right? Like the few things that I think the focus areas needs to be here is, one, workloads moving to the cloud means that you need to have your SD-WAN strategy very clearly and have a cloud on-ramp strategy, right? I think most of our customers have data centers with one or more public clouds. So how do you securely connect and extend your SD-WAN fabric to a multi-cloud environment while having that consistent policy is number one. Number two, we already talked about cloud security, right? And then the need for everything that solution like Umbrella provides is the second key one. And I think the third key one, Chris, it's as you're saying, right? Like it's getting to be an agile application development environment with CI/CD type of development tools. So I think the Cisco, we as an IT organizations have breaking silos between NetOps and DevOps and app dev, where applications need to be able to provision infrastructure at the touch of a button and as fast as possible. So with things like Terraform providers, Ansible playbooks, etc., how fast can you provision your underlying compute network resource becomes very crucial. So the capabilities that we provide with Cisco Nexus Dashboard and the integration that we've done with HashiCorp, Terraform, Red Hat, Ansible, the same with Intersight, our hybrid cloud operations platform, are some of the solutions that we will see an uptick tremendously because of this move of workloads to a hybrid cloud environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a Cisco internal example, right? Cisco makes WebEx, And if WebEx expands to satisfy pandemic needs and expands their hosting capabilities, we have to make sure that our corporate firewalls understand that because it's sort of internal to us as well, right? The WebEx. So we have to make sure that we do that lockstep with them. And you can't do that easily with paper and, and writing down subnets, right? That is really hard to do. So you've got to find some ways to link those things together.
Yeah. So more around this automation, which brings us nicely to this topics of how more and more automation technologies are used in network operations, right? So, and it's interesting, Chris, if you can talk through some of the kind of the disruptions and how network outages have caused cloud disruptions and ISPs, and we've heard that, right? Like from Azure, from AWS, all of that stuff, since those are very critical environments on which businesses are run and how those disruptions can really impact the reputation of the companies and the loss in productivity. So how have you folks seen this and how have you handled that from a Cisco IT perspective?
Yeah. We absolutely have, and when the TAC reports in that they have agents that can't log cases or they have an issue like that, immediately we have to figure out where that problem is, and we've had several of those issues. Don't want to name names on this call, but about a month and a half ago there was a fairly widespread service provider core issue in the United States. And it was a multi-part problem. And when it first comes in, it looks like it's our stuff, but we have to figure out very quickly it's a service provider having an issue. And even once that starts to stabilize, we realize some of the cloud applications that we're trying to access are also using the service provider. So we can't switch our traffic simply through the service provider. Understanding that, navigating that is really important for us to use tools. Like I said, we've been using ThousandEyes for a couple of years. We absolutely loved it. We're very happy with the acquisition because there's no way for us to get a good crystal ball into what's going on to the rest of the world. Because there are those disruptions. They could be regional, they could be widespread, and you will find all sorts of them when you start to really live in the cloud world.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm particularly excited because we call the ThousandEyes the Google Maps for the internet, right? So it's very, very crucial to understand since most of the ITs won't have control and complete visibility of every single traffic flow, right? Because half of that don't even traverse your infrastructure. So how do I get complete visibility from users to application? And this is where ThousandEyes comes in. And the combination of ThousandEyes and the strength of the Cisco install base that we can run agents of ThousandEyes and make it as automated as possible so that we can provide that more detailed granular visibility and proactive ways of taking actions, just like the outages that you mentioned, because it was interesting when we were talking to our global customer advisory board, they obviously saw those same outages, but they were able to use ThousandEyes and immediately switch internet providers so that they couldn't lose any revenue generating business traffic, right? Like that kind of like a proactive way of approaching and giving visibility becomes very, very crucial in this new world. And that's where I think we have our concept of what we call at Cisco agile platforms, right? Which is like, how do we build automation in terms of your day zero to day end operations? And how do we generate insights through the data and the traffic flow that we see, whether it's the access, the WAN, the data center, and the hybrid cloud environments, and use that to make your operations faster and smarter. And that's where the world of NetOps is heading, more and more automation tools for day zero to day end operations and more analytics to provide complete visibility and then predictive operations, which I think moves us nicely to our last trend around how more and more machine learning and AI techniques are used in NetOps environment to complement the NetOps capability, right? And I think this is very crucial because there are tons of tools out there, right? I think there's no dearth of tools in the world of IT operations and network operations. You have a problem, we have a tool for that, right? So, and the challenge is you get so many alerts and false positives that, hey, this is a critical issue and this is a big alert, etc. So the biggest thing that I think AI and machine learning techniques and capabilities solves for network operations is one, it helps you identify the really critical issues and take out all the noise. So the signal to noise ratio increases so that using machine learning, you can truly understand what's normal for your network, for your environment, and over a period of time learn and only point issues that are critical for your environment. So that's where we are using machine learning technologies and using that in a lot of our customer base. So that's number one. And number two is, hey, if I see a particular issue in one part of your network based on machine learning, I can say that, hey, this is a systemic issue that 5 other parts of your network in different buildings or different sites are experiencing because of the same traffic pattern. And here's the recommended action that you can take as another area of machine learning analysis that we are seeing. And then wireless, I think, is one of the most common access use case of driving assurance and using machine learning to understand how is the wireless performing and what are some of the issues that our customers are seeing and why they are seeing. Is it onboarding issue? Is it policy issue? Is it SSID issue, etc. So those are some of kind of the things that we are seeing. And Cisco AI Network Analytics is a capability that we have built into the DNA Center that uses all these traffic pattern and machine learning analysis, and we've reduced those false positives by 99%, right? It's a huge thing because it really frees up IT time to focus on what is core and focus on what is truly essential. So I know we have been using these not only for networking, Chris, but also for security, right? So in understanding kind of threat patterns, etc. So what are some of the plans that Cisco IT has in place to leverage machine learning and AI capabilities in the future?
Yeah, I'd like to tell you we're super far down the road, but we're not. So I think we're in the early phases. So what we're focusing on right now is that correlation and noise reduction, right?
Yeah.
If you get millions of alerts a day, you need something to tune them down because you need to know the ones that are actionable. What do you really need to do something with? And then that correlation is also important. I actually have an example from Tuesday. Tuesday we had as in our events monitoring room where our Cisco Enterprise Operations Center is looking at. So they're not just looking at network; they're looking at data centers and workloads and stuff like that. We had within 5 minutes of each other reports of one of our supply chain sites having a network problem in one region. Reports of some contact center agents unable to log onto the VPN and they got disconnected in the same region, right? And it was a manual effort to then correlate those and say, aha, it's this service provider, and we confirmed it with ThousandEyes. In the future, we want to automate that, right? Mm-hmm. We want that to be the kind of thing that AIOps drives so that, even though we were pretty quick about it, it was still a bunch of people looking at it that said, aha, I bet it's this thing, and we found it out. We would like to be able to just get that automated so that when it does happen, have ThousandEyes tell us, automatically know what's going on, know where to direct our time, know if we need to switch to a different service provider or not. And it was a great example from just Tuesday, and we all see the potential of it. We just have work to do. So that's what we're aiming for right now is that correlation of the events and the removal of the noise, and then really trying to tie this data together so that we can start to get that baseline of where we are and know when really extreme events do happen.
That's awesome. And I think at a very high philosophical level, like shifting this IT from a reactive to proactive to more of a predictive IT operations with the use of AI ops is where I think most of forward-thinking IT organizations are going towards. And the better specific use case, like what you mentioned, Chris, the better it is for us. So I know we got carried away with this conversation, and we want to leave enough time for live Q&A. I know John and team have been actively answering a lot of chat questions, but we still want to leave at least 5 to 10 minutes. So, Chris, final best practices to your peers here in terms of what should they think and what should they start looking at from their IT perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first is sort of thematic, right? It's not really specific, but this has been a time for us when we're really starting to think a lot more about what should we do and what we must do, or what we want to do versus what we need to do. Those things are a lot clearer for us right now. And so, we're trying to not get distracted from unnecessary things that are maybe not as critical or core. And so we're trying to be laser focused. We know we have to automate. Our use of automation over the last 9 months has skyrocketed. It's the only way we can be fast.
Yeah.
We've all been in these conversations where people say IT should be faster and more flexible. Yeah, okay, now it's real. We have to do it. So lean into that. Moving to cloud, I'm not just talking about public cloud. I'm talking about the cloud concept of where your workloads live. You need to start getting your head around the idea that your workloads might be private or public, and you might want to move them. And how are you going to handle that? And so you gotta get your head around cloud delivered workloads, whether it's public or private, because that's the only way you're going to be flexible in the future. And then finally, as you do this, your experience is going to be, it might get a little bit strange if you're not careful, because you need consistent policy and consistent experience. If you do move a workload to the cloud, your end user sitting at home, whether on a VPN or zero trust or a hardware device, they still need to access it, and the policy needs to be relatively the same. So you really need to think about those things as you go forward. We're going to have to go fast. I think fundamentally how we work has changed. So for us, this is what we're focusing on in the coming years.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Chris, for your final thoughts there. I think this is a whole lot of things that we covered. So I know it's a whole lot for you to take in. So we made it simple in terms of like these trends and what does that mean to our networking report there. So you can go and take a look at that. But also we had a business resiliency summit that we did in APJC that has very relevant conversation, and we have a business resiliency page at Cisco.com. If you just search for that, that gives you clear offers, solution, use cases, and how to get started based on the conversations that Chris and I had today. So feel free to take a look at that. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. And Jasmine and Annie, are there any questions that John, with his fast typing, hasn't been able to answer, or that we need to compliment that we can have for the next few minutes?
Yeah, John did a fabulous job in answering all of our questions that we got in the chat. But I guess I'll pose one right now. Do you guys have any guidance on how you prepare to have multiple cloud providers ready in case you need them, even while you may not want to use them at the moment?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. We probably use all of the cloud providers to some degree or another. So for us, it would be a question of scaling up existing, service agreements with them. So maybe if you're a smaller enterprise that have a single agreement, that might be different. But for us, we use lots of different SaaS applications, and we probably have stuff hosted in all the major cloud providers. In fact, I'm confident we do. One of them I know does a lot of our content delivery. One of them I know we've got, some business applications hosted in. I know one of them is where we spun up our virtual desktop environments, right? So we use them all, and it's just a question of negotiating that at scale. So I don't think that's something that we've had to deal with, because we have a fairly large relationship with them. We do a lot with them already.
Very cool. I guess another question I'll ask is, how are you preparing, or what is being done to prepare for when a cloud provider might have an outage?
So that's the business resiliency aspect of it. And when I say, think about how you move to cloud, you have to think about how you structure your business and how you structure your applications. If you simply move a workload to a single cloud provider who is providing out of a single region, you didn't really adopt the sort of cloud idea. You still have a single point of failure with your own resiliency. You need to think from that business resiliency way back on slide 3 or something like that, of how you're going to handle that. And that might mean you need to have either 2 providers, or you need to make sure you're in 2 different availability zones with your workload and some load balancers between them. So you really have to think about it in a cloud way. Because otherwise you will have those issues. And honestly, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, maybe you guys remember, at least one of the major cloud providers, again, not to name and shame, did have some issues with one of their availability zones. And if you had an app that was just in one of them, you were probably down and impacted for a while. But if your app was in both of them, you probably were okay, because it probably failed over to the other one. You got to think about how you build your business applications and your business functions in the same way. And the cloud providers know how to do this. I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same way you had built disaster recovery in the back data center days. Now it's the same for hybrid cloud and multi-cloud days, right? So how do you build disaster recovery and not be dependent on just one cloud provider?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's another question that came in privately. Are there particular sites like Netflix or Hulu or YouTube that you're blocking?
Generally, Cisco is fairly open, and we generally only block sites that are malicious. But what we do is we use policy, and we use things like QoS or various application experience tools, depending on what product people are on, to make sure that, for instance, the WebEx video is at a higher priority and Netflix, YouTube is at a lower priority. We've been doing that for years because every once in a while we do have some issues with some load. And we also do a fair amount of cloud on-ramp, off-ramp in our SD-WAN, and in our VPN world we do some split tunneling. One of our big examples of that is when everyone's working at home and, for instance, Apple pushes out an OS update on a Monday morning, that's a different scenario than when everybody's on campus because all those updates are now flowing across everyone's VPN connection. So we actually split tunnel that off so that everyone can get their updates, but it doesn't all flow across our network. So we do things like that to make sure that we get a good experience, but we don't tend to block traffic unless it's actively malicious. We do use things like Umbrella to do some DNS protection, right? And we do block some definitely malicious or nefarious sites on our corporate firewalls. But we tend to not block. We tend to trust our employees a reasonable amount because, again, we're relying on defense in depth. You've got your AnyConnect client on your desktop. You're running some sort of endpoint agent, a device manager, everything single sign-on with Duo. So we tend to not block a lot of websites. So we let you watch Netflix. We just might tune it down so that it streams and buffers a lot.
So I think application prioritization helps there, and I think we have enough bandwidth capacity. So I think it's not necessarily about bandwidth, but it's more around security and compliance and policy issues, right? So it's all about malicious things. So the concept of having AnyConnect and Umbrella and having the right policies does help to prevent any kind of malicious threat infiltrating the corporate network through, going to some websites that we shouldn't be going to. I think that's where you folks are focused more on.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, so I think we are running out of time. We are at the top of the hour there. So I think thank you again, folks, for taking the time here. I hope this has been useful for you. And in terms of understanding how Cisco and Cisco IT is thinking through some of the trends, what have we heard from our customers, and what we call our customer zero, Cisco IT. And in terms of preparing for this, for the future, and building business resilient solution, and particularly from a network infrastructure and operations perspective. So thank you for taking the time. Hope you folks have a very safe and healthy end to the year, and talk to you folks soon. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot, Chris, again, for taking the time to share your wisdom and feedback and your perspective on this.
Absolutely. Remember, wisdom comes from making mistakes. So
And it's generally not the network.
That's right. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.